Hi, my name is Alexey Archipenko. Today I'd like to show you an example of using a new EastWest Hollywood Orchestral Percussion collection. This is the new library that was released in the year 2014, which concludes the Hollywood Orchestral Collection. This collection comprises the strings, brass, woodwinds, and percussion now. And this collection replaces the previous Symphonic Orchestra collection of the EastWest. It has the same integrity as the previous collection. This new collection was recorded using 5 microphones in the same studio, and so the sound blends very good. Here is this collection. You have diamond and gold options. Diamond being 5 mics and 24-bit, and gold being 1 mic and 16th beat. This new Hollywood Orchestra collection is much more detailed than the previous Symphonic Orchestra collection that still can be purchased and that has many editions, and still it can create great sound as I showed in the previous video tutorial called Gold. So this new library, Hollywood Orchestral Percussion, goes also in 2 editions. Diamond and gold, with the same differences. Diamond version is about 75 gigabytes. It is based on the Play software that I was discussing in the previous lecture called Gold. It looks like this. This orchestral percussion collection has approximately the same instruments like the EastWest Symphonic Orchestra collection, but there are some differences. The first difference is that the new collection has 5 microphones, while the previous EastWest Symphonic Orchestra has 3. Also, there are many new instruments. For example, many different snares and fill drums were added. There are now 3 bass drums. More cymbals were added. There are a lot of anvils. Break drums were added. Also, celesta and temple blocks were added. The next difference is the number of articulations. For example, if we take the snare drum, then we can see that there are a lot of articulations for a snare drum. By the way, here is a very good illustration of the microphones that we used in the library. It is the illustration from the manual. And here you can see that there are central microphones, middle microphone, the 3 microphones that are called main, surround microphones, and vintage surround microphones. So as for the snares, they are not only the central hits as was with the Symphonic Orchestra, but also there are edge hits now, flams, rim shots, bouncers, and the same thing happens with many other instruments like timpani and bass drums. Also for timpani and bass drums you have now 2 different mallets, felt mallet and hard mallet. Also now you can use different lengths of hits. For example, you can use the short hit that will be muted quickly, and also you can use the long hit that will be muted not so quickly. For cymbals you have 3 different lengths instead of 2 in the previous Symphonic Orchestra version. Also you have many different effects for tam-tam and so on. So there are much more articulations. And the next difference is that there are now round robins in the library. In the EastWest Symphonic Orchestra there were no round robins in the percussion section, or there were very little of them. Now for each hand, for example, for left hand and for right hand, you have 4 round robins, which means that you can play 8 notes alternating between the hands, and only after that you will have the sample repeated. And then you can, for example, change to some other position on the drum, for example to some edge hit. Here is a list of the instruments that I used in the library. There are cymbals, drums, metals and woods, and the manual is as usual very thorough and deep. Okay, let's go to the demo track now. The track was created usually only this library, so no other libraries were used, no other collections. And the track was created in Cubase from the beginning, so there was no score in this particular situation, because there are not many notes in this place. The beginning of the track was created using the gong effects and some metal percussion and wood percussion. Then some drums were added. Then crescendo. And from here the main part starts with the drums. Let's see the gong. As you can see, the color shows the number of the channel. So I have the gong effects on the 16th channel. And you can see that I add up different effects that are stacking on each other, and gradually I'm using more and more loud effects. And at least I add crescendo, this one. Also, you can see that I do not release the sample, so I'm waiting for the natural release that happens somewhere here. And after auditioning this particular track, when I found out that this was the place, when most of the samples were almost over, I finished them somewhere here so that the natural release is sounding. By the way, you can see that I use only 5 tracks in my project, and I load almost all the samples, all the articulation in these tracks. I do it by dividing the samples into different MIDI channels, dividing the articulations, articulation instruments. Sometimes when there are more articulations than there are MIDI channels, which is 16, I add several articulations to the same channel and then move them using the transposition. So you can see that, for example, 5 different crashes are placed on the same channel with different transpositions. So it means that here you can have one crash, here is another, the 4th and the 5th. So just using the Cubase shift up and shift down keys, you can choose different crashes, audition and choose them. Using most of the articulation of the library takes about 1740 megabytes of memory, which says play, but in general almost 3.7 gigabytes is taken. And also you can see that CPU is used. Now when I play something, then the CPU use increases. As for the disk usage, I use the SSD, solid state drive, and it is used very little because also it is not the first play and most of the samples are in buffer. And generally I use only 2 microphones, the main microphone and the surrounding microphone. So using only 2 mics of the collection and using the solid state drive needs about 1 minute to load all the instruments. When I use the normal drives, hard drives, it takes even more, maybe about 2 or 3 minutes. By the way, the load is done in the background, so while the instruments are loading, you can change something in your project, which is convenient and which is the new feature of Play. For some instruments, I add the central microphone, for example, for the bass drum, for the timpani, and for celesta. So I use the central microphone for bass drum and timpani because they sound a little bit muddy with the surrounding microphones and with so many hits that I'm using in the demo. And using central microphone adds some more clarity for the sound. As for Celesta, the same thing. It sounds better with the central mic. So you can experiment with microphones, choosing different, and if you need some more clarity, usually you can add some closed microphone. Maybe if you need some more solo sound, you can add a closed microphone. You can see that closed microphone is added with low volume. So now returning to the cymbals, you can see that the volume is greatly increased here in both microphones and in the general output bus. This is done because I'm starting with very, very quiet articulations that are almost silent. But then when I add more articulations and add loud articulations, some crescendos, then the volume increased so much that if I did not decrease it, then the dynamic range would be too much for the track. So I decrease the volume when it begins to increase too much using the continuous control 11, which is expression, and these creates a more controllable dynamic range. You can see that I decrease the volume only of the single instrument. All the other instruments and all the other tracks are not decreased. Also, you can see that after this usage, I return the volume back to the previous value. Talking about the volume, I should say that there are a lot of points where you can change it. So the first point, or the first place where you can change the volume is the MIDI velocity, or maybe sometimes modulation wheel when you use the dynamic crossfade instrument or something like that. The next place is the expression continuous control 11, which changes the volume from the 0 to the volume that was set with the knobs and with the continuous control 7. So the next place to change the volume is continuous control 7, which is usually not advised to use for thematic control, because it is sometimes binned to some controls in the plugin. Okay, the next place is the microphone volume. Then there is the main volume, when you can change the volume. Then there is the track volume, and at last the volume of the main bars. In this case, group channel track or FX channel track. But this is not all, and sometimes you can change the volume using the level control of the sound card. So there are a lot of volume controls, and usually by default you have them set to some 0 position, and when you change them, then you should remember where you changed anything. So you can see that I choose to change the volume not using the crossfade, but using this continuous control 11, because there are no dynamic crossfades, and also I don't think that crossfading the effects of the tam-tam is a good idea, because it could lead to some phasing problems. At the same time, with the effects, there is the chime sounding. It is panned to the right, as you can see. Then there is some rain, Mach 3 sounding. And at the same time, there are some wood blocks and temple block sounding. Here is the temple block roll, which is also not crossfaded, but the volume of the sample is changed. So again, there is no crossfade sample, because there is almost impossible to record a crossfade for the fast changing beats. Usually crossfade are created for the sustained sound or some very fast rolls like snares, for example. In this sample, single beats, single hits are audible, and if they were crossfade, then the beats, the hits will blend with each other and create some noise. The next thing that I use here is tempo changing. You see that the next roll that I use is created with the single notes, and you can see that the tempo decreases in this place, increases here and decreases here again. This is created with the tempo track, so that the first roll begins quietly and slowly, then becomes fast and loud, and then again fades out, becoming slower. So then I repeat the same thing. Here are the Mahler hammer and the castanets that add up at the culmination. Now, talking about the drums, I use some crescendo beats of the marching band, marching drum ensemble. Then the marching band continues, and the bass drum adds. It sounds like this. So you can hear that I use short hits, long hits, that is sometimes moved a little bit to the right because they have a shorter attack and they do not sync very good with the short hits if they're not moved. Then there are some crescendos, more crescendos. By the way, you can hear that these crescendos are sensitive to the note of event, and if you place them like this, for example, then there will be some sound break, some unnatural release, artificial release. So it's not very good. That is why I increase the length of these samples. Then there are some rolls. By the way, you can see that these rolls differ very little in the MIDI velocity, but they differ very much in the resulting sound. This is because the different MIDI velocities refer to different recorded dynamic layers, and dynamic layers often differ greatly. So you should understand that, and for the percussion instruments this can be important. And if you don't know this, then using some randomization on MIDI velocity can create some unexpected results. Let's unmute these samples. So then the track continues, and at last the felt mallet moves to the hard mallet. So for this particular instrument, it's the channel number 14th. Here you can see that these are felt mallet and these are hard mallet. So the difference is subtle, but there is a difference in the sound. Also, important thing is that although all the samples are been to the same notes, just moved 2 octaves, but the crescendos, for example, are of different lengths, so that you need to retune them, resync. For example, these crescendos Oh, by the way, there is even no crescendo. And there is just the long hit. There are the hits, there are crescendos. This is the crescendo. And by the way, if you decrease the mid velocity of the crescendo a little bit, then it will be not a crescendo, but something like crescendo diminuendo or a little crescendo. Here is the same thing. I will decrease it, increase it. This is the result of randomizing these velocities. Okay, so now you can see that this time does not equal this time. This time is a little bit longer. So this is the result of using different samples. In this case, we're using the same samples of crescendos with the felt mallet, and now we're beginning to use the different samples with the hard mallet. So there is not enough just to move the samples, the other notes, but also you need to listen to them and sometimes sync the rhythm. Here is the snare drum. Here I use left hand and right hand hits. Then I use left hand edge hit, right hand edge hit. Here is the flam, the rim shot, and some rolls. It sounds like this. By the way, here you can see that I use a long crescendo, and it is so long that it takes several hits inside. But really there is no sound until this point, because there is very quiet sound of increasing of a crescendo, and generally you can barely hear it. Now talking about the timpani, it is very close to the bass drum, but the difference is the first is the notes I used for pitch, and this is the cause why the different effects are not mapped on the pitch, so they are mapped to different channels. In this case the flam is here. It is the 5th channel in my case. Then there is the 2nd channel for long hits, the 1st channel for short hit. Here is some crescendo roll. By the way, you can see that these samples overlap. This is the sign of overlapping. If you can see this very thin line, because if you delete overlaps, then you can see that the line becomes stronger. But in this case it is not important, because these samples are not sensitive to the note end. So this instrument doesn't do anything at the note end. You can create very short samples and it will sound okay. But you should understand that some samples are sensitive to the note ends, and some samples are not sensitive, and those that are sensitive you should be very careful with these, because if you create them too short, then there will be release sample sounding, which you often do not want to. Now you can see that the same pattern is repeated with the different channels. And the reason for this is that I use the hard mallet in this case, and I mapped the hard mallet to the same numbers of channels, just adding a 10. For example, the first channel is the short felt timpani, and the 11th channel is the short hard timpani hits. Okay. So the only thing that I needed to do is just to add 10 to the number of channels that we used, and then check all the crescendos for them to be in sync, because there are new articulations, new samples of crescendos in this case. Okay, talking about the cymbals, I use both the long and short hits. And by the way, these cymbals are not sensitive to the note-offs. And these crescendos, they are sensitive. You can hear that if you decrease it, then it will not sound. So you should increase the length of these crescendos so that there is no sound when you end the note. You can see that these samples overlap because I used the same track from many instruments, and in this case there was no possibility to avoid this overlap, because in this channel I already have 5 octaves used for different crashes, so I didn't avoid this overlap. There's not a big problem here because I know what is happening under these samples. But in general, this is not very good, and the best way to avoid this would be to delete some maybe articulations from your list, or maybe to create another track and move these samples to the track like this, for example. Okay. Now let's see the metals. I used the anvils and the break drums here. Here are the anvils, here are the break drums. They are muted break drums, I think. And here I add the vibraphone with the sustain pedal pressed, which creates long unmuted notes. I think we can decrease the cymbal. Okay, now let's have a look at the wood percussion. Here is the wood percussion. So let's start here. You can see that here is the xylophone, celesta, and marimba. I think that it would be more convenient if you divide some melodic instruments into several separate tracks, I think. But in this case I used the same track for all the wood percussion instruments and used the transposing to move them from the way of each other. You can see that I added waves in the xylophone melody, in the MIDI velocity like this, and also I added some random velocity changes in marimba and celesta. And then there are some rolls sounding. Of course there are no legato transitions between them, but rolls sound okay. By the way, you can hear now that the note is stuck. So to copy this you need to press stop on voices. Okay. Here is the celesta effect, run. By the way, I can hear that the xylophone sounds a little bit uneven, the rhythm is a little bit uneven. Maybe it is a feature for creating a more realistic rhythm of a real xylophone player. Okay, anyway, in the mix it sounds okay, and also you can see that, by the way, I changed the positions of some articulations, especially the long bass drums, long bass drum hits. As for the snare drums, I didn't change them almost. Maybe a little bit sometimes. But you should understand that adding a lot of round robins leads to change of the attack time, because each sample is set manually. The attack is set manually, the position from which it is played is set manually, and then there can be some variation in the rhythm of the sample playing if it is repeated. On the other hand, this is what we are seeking, so this is what we need to create the non-machine gun sound. So to create non-machine gun sound we need different attacks, a little bit different positions maybe, because the human cannot play with exact attacking positions. Okay, I showed you the mixing. In this particular situation I used not only MIDI velocity, but also in some places I used 11th continuous control to change expression, to change resulting volume of the channel. But this not always decreased the dynamics enough for some simple speakers and for the dynamics that I wanted from the track. So then I added some saturation, some compression and some limiting, and at last I got the dynamics that I wanted. It sounds like this. Okay, so you can see the settings. As for the stereo panning, I panned the bass drum and the timpani to different sides because their sounds are very close and they create some bass rumble. Also, I panned different melodic instruments to different sides so that they create some of the stereo effect, stereo melodic effect. And I panned some wood blocks and chimes to different sides so that when there is some introduction with these tam-tam effects, then there is some special effect. As for randomization, I did not use the randomization of note positions and tempo because in my opinion there was enough randomization from the round robins that was in place. and I used some randomization for the MIDI velocity, as I showed, for the notes that were repeating. And I want to show two more important things about the collection. I found out that in this very early version there is something like the spike at the beginning of some samples. Let's try this. I increase the sound so you can hear. And at the beginning of this sample and of some other samples, there is a little spike. Okay, so to take care of this, I just increase the attack time so that the spike is covered under the envelope. Now there is no spike. Let's check it. So you hear that there is no noise now. Very good. Well, you should understand that, of course, this noise is not audible when you do not increase the volume of these microphones and the outputs. So maybe this is okay for general mixing, but as I increase the volume of these effects to create some special effect, some special acoustic effect. So in my particular situation I need to remove this noise. And one more important thing about the collection is that it contains the dynamic crossfading rolls that are very useful, but you see that I do not use them. This is because they are not yet working good, and when I change this to the crossfade rolls, they're not always working okay. Sometimes they're working bad, and I already reported this to the service of the library, and they told me that they will work on this. Oh, it's working okay now. Not very good. You hear that the note off is delayed, and these notes are also delayed. And there is some sound artifact also. So I'm showing this for you to understand that there is not a problem and that EastWest is already working on this. So talking about the collection, I should say that it is very impressive. It has a lot of articulations, instruments, and very thorough deep sampled. And if you need a good orchestral percussion, then this collection is a good choice. And also if you need a whole bunch of the orchestral instruments, then this is also a good choice, the Hollywood Orchestra, the whole collection of the Hollywood Orchestra. I hope this will help you, and I'm waiting for you in my future tutorials.